He had eaten his friend's brain with butter and said it actually tasted good. Hours before, Peter Bryan had just been released from psychiatric care. Doctors believed he was stable. A friend waited for him, unaware of the danger lurking behind that calm exterior. What happened next would shock the world. Peter's life was defined by a mind that was torn apart by schizophrenia and a history of violence that shouldn't have been ignored. Yet the system failed him and everyone around him. On February 17th, 2004, in East London, he murdered Brian Cherry, a friend, in a way that was both gruesome and incomprehensible. Dismemberment, cannibalism, acts that make you disgusted just thinking about it. And then came the confession. He spoke of it calmly, almost casually, saying that he'd eaten parts of Brian's brain with butter and that it tasted good. It was the kind of statement that leaves a mark on the memory. It revealed a mind that was both disturbed and terrifyingly deliberate. Authorities thought placing him in Broadmoor Hospital would be enough. But by April of 2004, Peter struck again. Richard Lowell, another patient, became his victim. He admitted later that he planned the attack. Even in the safest environment, he found a way. The horrors isn't just in the murderers, it's in the failures that allow them to happen. Investigators later show a care team unprepared for a person like Peter. Lapses in supervision, misjudged assessments, and underestimating the danger created a perfect storm. Families were devastated and communities were shaken. And the world was left asking how someone so dangerous could slip through the cracks not just once, but twice. Peter Bryan received 2 life sentences, but it was ultimately downgraded to manslaughter due to his mental illness. He is now detained indefinitely at a high-security psychiatric hospital. What did you guys think about this case? Leave it down in the comments below.
I do not care what survival movie you have seen, humans do not freeze to 71 degrees, lose their pulse, shut down their organs, and straight up hibernate for 3 weeks. That is not a thing. Except that is exactly what happened to a man named Mitsukata. He was just a regular guy from Japan, and one day he had this barbecue with his co-workers on this mountain called Mount Roko. And when it was time to head back, everyone got inside of their cable cars, but Mitsukata, he decided to stay behind and walk down the mountain instead. Probably to enjoy the scenic views, and honestly, I do not blame him. It was beautiful. But for the next 24 days, nobody knows what happened to him because he never caught up to his co-workers and he never made it back home. People quite literally assumed the worst, and honestly, I don't blame them, because what no one knew is that sometime during that walk down the mountain, Mitsukata lost his footing, slipped off of the trail, and fell. He had shattered his pelvis and couldn't move, so he was stuck down at the bottom of this mountain with no food, no water, and no way to get back up. But here's where the story turns into actual science fiction. Almost 1 month later, when they finally found him, he was not dead. His body had somehow slowed itself down. His temperature had dropped down to 71 Fahrenheit, and for context, hypothermia usually kills at around 82. He didn't eat, he didn't drink, he didn't move for 24 days, and somehow his brain managed to preserve itself. Doctors said that it was the closest thing to human hibernation they have ever seen. They called it medically unexplainable because his body had went into some kind of self-preservation to protect itself. I still don't know how to process that, but still.
She lost her life because she mispronounced a word. Lydia Schatz was born on March 15th of 2002 and was originally from Liberia. Kevin and Elizabeth Schatz lived in Paradise, California with their 6 biological children. The couple decided they wanted to add more to their family, so they headed to Liberia to adopt 3 children, including Lydia. What Lydia and her 2 siblings thought were going to be a loving home was the complete opposite. On February 5th of 2010, Lydia was harmed so badly with a 1/4-inch plastic tube just because she mispronounced a word. Kevin and Elizabeth held down Lydia for 9 hours and harmed her so badly on her back that it caused severe tissue damage, and that following day, she passed away. Lydia's 11-year-old sister Zariah was also harmed by Kevin and Elizabeth because allegedly she was a bad influence and a liar. She was hospitalized and in critical condition, but thankfully she survived. When Kevin and Elizabeth were being questioned, they stated that they used child discipline teachings used by fundamentalist Christian organizations. Investigators discovered that Kevin and Elizabeth were also doing this to their biological children and were even teaching their oldest daughter to join in on doing this to her siblings. In court, Kevin was found guilty and sentenced to a minimum of 22 years, and Elizabeth was also found guilty and sentenced to 13 years in prison.
This TikToker ended the lives of her mother and stepfather, and then she messages a true crime page asking them to help find the person who did it, as if she wasn't the one who pulled the trigger. So here's what we know so far. Her name is Sarah Grace Patrick. She's 17 and living in this small little quiet town in Georgia called Tias. And for whatever twisted reason, she decided to take the lives of her mother, Kristen, and her stepfather, James. It's late, the house is dark, everyone is asleep, and Sarah decides to grab a weapon. Don't ask me how she got it, she's 17. But she walks down that hallway, pushes their bedroom door open, and shoots them, both of them in their own bed. Then she just goes back to her room as if nothing happened, until the next morning when Sarah's 5-year-old little sister wakes up and walks into that room. She sees their bodies and immediately starts screaming and calling for help. And Sarah, she walks in playing dumb like she had no idea. She wraps her arms around her little sister to comfort her, and then she calls 911. She told them someone broke in and shot her parents, and from the jump, everyone believed her. The whole town was grieving, friends, families, church members, and Sarah played the part. She showed up to the funeral acting absolutely devastated. She cries, she hugs people, she's sobbing as if she just lost her whole world, as if she didn't just end it with her own hands. And then, because the performance was not enough, she gets online, finds a true crime page on TikTok, and messages them, and not anonymously, from her own personal account. She said, "They're my parents. Someone came into our house while I was there with my 5-year-old sister and shot them. We woke up and found them like that." And the way she says it, she adds, they were brutally murdered, knowing that she's the one who did it. And the creator, thinking this poor girl's trying to spread awareness, takes the time out of her day to make the post, thinking that they were just helping an innocent girl find closure, and Sarah even thanked them. Except she did not stop there. Someone in the video had asked what kind of weapon was used, and Sarah responded with a water gun emoji under a post about her murdered parents. And then another person says, "Seems like it was someone who knew them." And Sarah goes, "Most definitely was. They knew the house." They? Girl, it was you! It's like she's role-playing as the grieving daughter and the internet detective at the same time. But Sarah doesn't stop the act. She's making all of these sad videos, basically begging for attention. In one post, she had written, "They don't know it yet, but a year from now, me and my 5-year-old sister will find them dead in our home. What is wrong with you?" And the thing is, for a while, she got away with it because police did not know who did it at first. There was no forced entry, nothing was stolen, one door was cracked open, but that was it. The scene looked like someone they knew did it, which is exactly what Sarah kept saying because she was that person. But eventually, her story started cracking. Police found what they later called mountains of evidence. They haven't released everything yet because it's still an open case, but whatever they did find was enough to issue a warrant for her arrest. Sarah eventually turned herself in. She showed up to the station with her biological dad, and they arrested her on the spot. And now everyone is asking the same question. Why? What goes through the mind of a 17-year-old that makes them want to kill her mom and her stepdad? Like, what could they have done to deserve this? As always, I will see you in my next video. I love you. Mwah, group hug.
He thought he was talking to a woman online, but he was actually communicating with Nigerian scammers. 17-year-old Jordan DeMay was from Michigan, and he was someone who loved athletics. He played baseball, basketball, football, and running track. His family and friends described him as mature, compassionate, and someone who would make everyone's life brighter. In March of 2022, Jordan received a DM from an Instagram account that appeared to be a woman with the username Danny.Roberts. This supposed girl that Jordan was talking to sent over her private photos and wanted his private photos in return, and he ended up doing it. Before sending those photos, Jordan had no idea that he wasn't actually speaking to a girl. He was actually speaking to 22-year-old Samuel Agashi from Nigeria. Samuel used this profile to force young men into sending private photos of themselves. Once Jordan had sent over that private photo of himself, Samuel demanded $1,000 from him. Well, Jordan didn't have $1,000, but he sent over $300 hoping it would be okay, but Samuel threatened him and told him that he would send the photo to his family and friends if he didn't send the full amount. Hours later, Jordan messaged the account and said that he was going to end his life, and Samuel responded by saying, "Good, do it and make it fast." Sadly, Jordan would go through with it, and he ended his own life. Jordan's parents were the ones to find him, and they had no idea what was even going on, so they looked through his phone and saw that an Instagram profile was messaging him. One of those messages stated that they were going to send the photos to all of his followers, including his friends and family, and they weren't going to stop until those photos went viral, but they wouldn't expose him unless he sent the full amount. Once law enforcement became involved, they tracked the IP address to Nigeria, where a lot of online sextortion scams are run out of. Once they were able to track down these scammers, it involved 3 people that were running the account, brothers Samuel and Samson, and another guy named Ezekiel, and it was revealed that they had more than 100 victims, and they were arrested in Nigeria and indicted in the United States. Ultimately, these scammers were sentenced to 17 years in prison.
This woman was murdered by pirates and then fed to piranhas while she was solo traveling. I'm True Crime Caitlin, and this is the horrifying murder of Emma Kelty. 43-year-old Emma was a head teacher from Surbiton in southwest London. After the heartbreaking death of her father, Emma decided that she wanted to go and live life to the fullest. She sold her flat, she quit her job, and decided to go out solo traveling. Emma was already a very experienced solo traveller. She had already been to the South Pole, where she was the 6th woman to ever ski there alone. She had spent over 50 days by herself in Antarctica, and she had hiked over 2,500 miles across North America. Emma decided that her next challenge was that she was going to kayak all the way along the Amazon River, which is over 4,000 miles long. On the 15th of June 2017, Emma flew to Peru to begin her journey, which she documented well across her blog, Instagram and Twitter account. And Emma would go on to tweet some of the scary things that she experienced, including a woman holding a child while waving a machete at her, coming across a group of men in boats, all of which were armed with arrows, and a time where she was sat for over 2 hours waiting to undress out of some wet clothes, but she couldn't because some men had parked up next to her and were just sat lingering watching her. She tweeted about her lack of sleep, that people would come up to her tent and shine torches to her, and eerily, one of the final things that she tweeted was a warning that she received from some locals. The next leg of her journey was an incredibly dangerous one, and the locals had warned her that she would either get her boat stolen from her or that she would be killed. On the 12th of September, Emma would pitch her tent nearby the remote quarry. As she was sat inside of her tent, she would be spotted by a gang of 5 men who were named the Water Pirates. These men were aged between their late teens up to their 20s. Upon seeing Emma's tent, the Water Pirates believed that she was actually a Colombian person who was smuggling drugs, and they wanted to steal it, so they began to shoot into the tent. Emma would be struck in the arm, and she came out of her tent waving her arms, showing that she wasn't a threat and crying out for help. The men would pounce on Emma, threatening her and demanding her to hand over the drugs that she didn't even have. They would abduct Emma, forcing her against her will into their boat, which was confirmed as some locals saw her inside of their boat. The gang would go on to brutally and repeatedly rape Emma. They tortured her, cutting off her hair using a knife, and even attempted to behead her, slitting her throat and cutting at her shoulder. Before being thrown into the Amazon River, profusely bleeding, which would attract the piranhas, Emma would be fatally shot in the head. The pirates had actually stolen several of Emma's electronic devices, including her GPS device, and while fiddling around with it, one of the pirates accidentally set off the SOS signal, which would lead the police directly to them once they began to search for Emma. Brazilian police, alongside the Brazilian Navy, would be able to recover some of Emma's belongings, including her tent, but sadly, to this day, Emma's body has never been found. The full gang of pirates would eventually be tracked down, and the main perpetrator, the man who allegedly shot Emma, was actually already murdered by a rival gang by the time the police came to find him. 3 of the other members would be incarcerated, although I couldn't find any information about their sentences. And finally, one of the pirates who had been on the run since 2017 was actually apprehended only last year after he took his daughter to hospital. He would be arrested and charged with murder and handed a sentence of 29 years and 11 months to serve.
This serial killer drew portraits of his victims before killing them, which led to him being nicknamed the Doodler. and he was never caught, so he is still out there somewhere today. San Francisco, California in the 1970s was one of the more safer and accepting places for people in the LGBTQ plus community. But that doesn't mean that it was completely safe or accepting. It was still the 1970s in the United States. Being gay was actually still illegal in America and wasn't even completely decriminalized until 2007. But compared to the rest of the country, San Francisco is definitely seen more as a safe haven. So in the 1960s and 1970s, it saw a large wave of gay men moving into the area. And then these young men started going missing and started being murdered. The doodler would go to gay bars where he would find his victims. Witnesses claim that they saw him drawing portraits of his intended victims on cocktail napkins in the bar, and he would use these drawings as a way to approach his victim and kind of flirt with them. Other witnesses say that he did not draw portraits of his victims and he actually would just draw like doodles of animals, so this detail is pretty up in the air. And then the doodler and his victim would leave the bar together, and his victim would later be found beaten and stabbed to death in a park or by the water. Gerald Kavanaugh was the first victim found, and he was found stabbed 17 times. And then an extremely popular drag performer in the area named Jay Stevens was found stabbed 3 times. And then Klaus Kreisman, who was actually from Germany and he was a married father, was found stabbed 15 times and his throat was cut. It was after this third victim that the investigators started to link all of these murders together, realizing that they now had a serial killer in their area. But unfortunately, because of the discrimination at the time, a lot of the police actually did not care about finding this killer because it was believed that the victims were either openly gay or closeted. And then 2 more victims were found, Frederick Capen and Harold Goldberg. There were a group of investigators that actually really did care, and they had 2 theories about who their serial killer was. They believed that their killer, the doodler, was either a man that really hated gay people, or he was a gay man that was struggling with his sexuality. There were also quite a few attempted murders done by the doodler, so there are survivors and witnesses. And 3 of these men have not had their identities released to the public because they did not want the public to know about their sexuality. One of these men was an American diplomat. The second one was a very well-known actor. And the third man was apparently so well-known and his job was so specific that even releasing his job title would be enough for people to identify him. These witnesses did not want to come forward publicly, which was their right, but the investigators do know these people's identities, and these 3 witnesses helped put together a composite sketch of what the doodler serial killer looks like. Police started getting a lot of tips, but 2 tips that came in were pointing fingers at the exact same man. And one of these tips actually came from a therapist that claimed that their patient confessed to being the killer. And this man looked exactly like the composite sketch, so he was brought in for questioning. His identity has also not been released to the public. He admitted to the police that he was struggling and questioning his own identity and sexuality, but he denied being the killer. But for reasons that we do not know, we do not have all of the facts. The investigators have kept a lot of the information close to their chest. Investigators believe that they are certain that this man is their serial killer. I also saw it reported that those 3 witnesses I told you about a second ago were also able to pick him out of a photo lineup. So the police were actually planning to arrest this man and bring him to trial for being a serial killer. But those 3 witnesses that I told you about that do not have their identities released to the public decided that they did not want to testify because they were so nervous about being outed as gay men during the 1970s. So no charges were ever brought up against this man, which is definitely frustrating because it seems like they know that this man is guilty, but they can't do anything about it. It has been 50 years, and today this case is cold, but is definitely not closed, and that same suspect is still a person of interest today. Turns out, after being questioned by the police, that suspect left San Francisco, and then the killings just stopped all at the same time. They believe that it's very possible that he went somewhere else and kept on killing. They've also released a composite sketch of what they believe that this man looks like today. There is also a large cash reward for information that leads to an arrest in this case. I really believe that if this case happened today, it would have been solved, but for so many very different, complicated reasons, it couldn't be solved, which is extremely, extremely frustrating. Please let me know all of your thoughts, theories, and opinions in the comments. But while you're there, please always remember to be respectful. This is a serial killer, so there are many victims and many family members of these victims that are affected by this case. The investigators actually believe that they're able to link the doodler to even more unsolved murders other than the confirmed 5 victims that we already have. So just please always remember to be respectful. And while you're in the comments, please let me know what case you want to see me cover next. Thank you to everyone that suggested that we cover this case today. And I'll see you guys all next time in my next video. Please be a good person to your fellow person.
This 18-year-old catfished and groomed a 14-year-old boy that he had met online. He then lured him to his flat in Essex, only to barbarically murder him in the most haunting way. I'm True Crime Caitlin, and this is the murder of Breck Bednar. Lauren Lefebvre would move to the UK from America, believing that the UK was a safer place to raise her children. She would eventually end up living in Surrey. Lauren was the mother of 4 children. Her oldest was 14-year-old Breck, and then she had triplet daughters. Breck was described as a very affectionate, kind, funny, happy little boy who was intelligent. He was obsessed with all things to do with technology and computers, especially online gaming, which is very popular now. I know that my little brother, who is 11, has been online gaming for a very long time. It was from online gaming that he would cross paths with 18-year-old Lewis Daines. Lewis owned a server which he allowed several young boys to come and play on, and they would all grow very close within the server. They would spend hours upon hours playing games together, chatting and getting to know one another. While these other boys would tell each other real things about their lives, Lewis would spit out lies. He really tried to big himself up and make himself appear better than he actually was. He told these impressionable young boys that he was living in New York City and that he worked for the American government as a Secret Service agent, and that he was also a successful businessman running a computer agency. His reality, though, was strikingly different. 18-year-old Lewis was an unemployed young man living alone in a flat in Essex. He unfortunately was abandoned by both of his parents at a very young age, which saw him being placed into foster care, where he remained up until he turned 16 when he was given this flat. Some of the boys in the server did see straight through Lewis's lies, and if any of them raised any concern or tried to call him out on it, Lewis would simply block them or kick them out of the server. Breck Bednar, however, was not one of these boys, and he believed everything that Lewis said. Lauren started to grow very concerned surrounding Breck's relationship with Lewis. His behaviour was quickly changing. He started refusing to go to church, he was back answering his mum, and he became very moody and reserved, which just wasn't like Breck. That wasn't in his character. Lauren was actually so concerned that she made a report to the police telling them that she believed that her son was being groomed online, and yet seemingly nothing came out of this report. She decided to take matters into her own hands, doing what she could. She cracked down on Breck's screen time and told him that he had to end the friendship with Lewis. However, like many other children at Breck's age, he thought that he knew better, and so he didn't listen to Lauren. He continued talking to and playing with Lewis on this server behind his mother's back. In February 2014, Breck told Lauren that he was going to be popping to a friend's house before making his way to his dad's house later that afternoon. He would jump into a taxi which Lewis had ordered for him and was driven over to Lewis's flat in Essex. He was going to the flat under the impression that Lewis was going to teach him more about computers, as Lewis apparently intended to hand down this fake business to Breck. We don't know the events of what happened after Breck entered Lewis's flat. However, we do know that Lewis would restrain him. He bound Breck, tying his wrists and his ankles behind his back with duct tape before proceeding to sadistically slit Breck's throat, killing him. As Breck was either dying or already dead, Lewis would take pictures of his body and then started sending it to his friends. It would actually be one of Breck's younger sisters who heard about what happened over text message, and by this point Lauren was already beside herself and frantic with worry after she learned that Breck never made it to his dad's house. To make this entire situation that tiny bit more heartbreaking, this was actually Lauren's birthday. The next morning, Lewis would ring the police and told the operator, quote, "I need police and a forensics team to my address. My friend and I got into an altercation and I am the only one who came out alive." When police arrived to Lewis's flat, they would find Breck's lifeless body. His bloody clothing was found inside of a bin bag, and all of Lewis's computers and electrics were discovered in a sink that was filled with water. This was his attempt to get rid of evidence. He was obviously then very quickly arrested under suspicion of murder. During the investigation, it was discovered that prior to the murder, Lewis had gone out in preparation for what he was about to do and bought duct tape, condoms and syringes. Shockingly, it was also discovered that only 3 years before the murder, so when Lewis would have been 15, he was accused of raping another younger boy and apparently had indecent images of children in his possession, yet for some reason nothing was done about either of those claims. Initially, Lewis Daines tried to portray this as him not committing murder. He said that Breck was attempting to take his own life and what Lewis did was an accident. He was trying to prevent Breck from doing that but accidentally ended up murdering him. At his pre-trial hearing, however, Lewis would go on to plead guilty to the murder of 14-year-old Breck Bednar. He was handed a sentence of life imprisonment with a minimum of 25 years to serve. It was theorized that the motive for Breck's murder was a sexual one.
His soccer coach got him so drunk his heart stopped beating, then dumped his body in a ditch like he was trash. 13-year-old Oscar Hernandez was a 7th grade student, a talented young athlete, and a kid who loved art. He played soccer for the Hurricane Valley Boys Soccer Club, and by all accounts, he was a bright and affectionate child with his whole life ahead of him. But on March 28, 2025, Oscar boarded a train from North Hollywood to Lancaster, California, to meet with his soccer coach Mario Garcia Aquino. Oscar believed he was helping design jerseys for the team, but he never came home. When Oscar's family realized something was wrong, they reported him missing. For days, they searched for answers, while investigators worked desperately to find him. Then, on April 2nd, the police made a horrifying discovery. Oscar's body had been dumped in a roadside ditch in Oxnard, more than 60 miles away from where he was last seen. The autopsy revealed a shocking cause of death: alcohol poisoning. The medical examiner ruled his death as a homicide. According to reports, Mario supplied Oscar with so much alcohol that it caused his heart to stop before sexually assaulting him, and investigators believe the coach has more victims. Another alleged victim testified that Mario offered minors money for every shot of tequila they drank. It was also revealed that there were multiple complaints involving other boys years before Oscar's death, and the evidence prosecutors laid out is chilling. DNA evidence tied Mario directly to the assault. They also tracked his cell phone to the very ditch where Oscar's body was found. Shortly before his arrest, authorities say they watched Mario bury a cell phone. When they dug it up, they allegedly discovered child, making the case even worse. Despite pleading not guilty, Mario Garcia Aquino was ordered to stand trial after a judge ruled that there was enough evidence to move forward with the case. His trial hasn't been scheduled yet. What do you guys think about this case? Leave your thoughts in the comments below.
Tied up with dog leads and thrown into a river to drown. This honestly sounds like something out of a nightmare. However, that is exactly what happened to this woman. I'm True Crime Caitlin, and this is the murder of Karen Skipper. 34-year-old Karen and her estranged husband Philip were spending the evening drinking together within a local bar in beautiful Broadway Cardiff in March 1996. The two had been separated for some time after Philip had learned that Karen had been cheating on him with a man named Jimmy. The two met when Karen was only 15 and Philip was 19. They bonded over their shared love of motorcycles, and it was said that they fell head over heels falls in love with one another. They would get married when Karen was just 17 years old, and following this for many years, they tried starting their own family. However, even with the help of IVF, they were unable to have any children, which was devastating for Karen. She dreamed of becoming a mother, and she was exactly the type of person who should be a mother. She was warm, she was kind, she was compassionate and caring, and this showed through her love and adoration for her nephews. After the two separated, Philip would actually go on to have a child with another woman, which I can imagine was just like a punch to the gut for Karen. However, on this March evening in 1996, the two got together, they spoke everything out, and they decided to reconcile and give their marriage another go. The two were seen in this bar being lovey-dovey with one another, laughing, being all soppy. However, just hours later, Karen Skipper would be dead. In the very late hours of the 10th of March, this is around about midnight, Karen decided to take her two dogs out for a walk in Birdie's Field alongside the River Ely. A neighbour of Karen's would later recall watching Karen walking down a path heading towards Birdie's Field / the River Ely, and she distinctly remembered Philip following Karen. However, he would later completely deny that. At approximately 7:30 a.m, another dog walker who was doing this route saw something weird. There was two dogs acting frantically, and he described them as looking bedraggled. They were running from the River Ely back up the bank to an abandoned pile of clothes. This man fed the dogs, then walked them down to the police station where he reported what he had seen. When officers arrived to the River Ely, they would make a horrifying discovery. Lay face down in 5 foot of water was the half-naked body of Karen Skipper. Her wrists and her ankles were tied behind her back. She was bound with her dog leads, and the person had tied these so tightly that it would have been impossible for Karen to loosen them. In fact, later, the medical examiner even had to get help in removing the restraints. Karen had sustained extensive bruising to her face, thigh and shins. During her post-mortem, it was discovered that both mud and silt were found inside of her lungs. This meant that, horrifyingly, Karen was still alive and breathing when she was thrown into the river. Philip would quickly become police's #1 suspect. He was the estranged, recently non-estranged husband. And witnesses would say that on that very night, while he was in the bar, he was saying some shady things about Karen. One of them recalled Philip saying, quote, "I'll tell you what, I'm going to kill Jimmy and I'll never forgive her. I tell you what, I haven't even started with Karen yet." Philip would spend the next 11 months on remand in Cardiff prison, where one of his cellmates would say that Philip essentially confessed to killing Karen, even going so far as to say Karen got what she deserved. He was put on trial for first-degree murder in 1997, and the jury would come back with a not guilty verdict. Philip was acquitted. The main reason for this was a striking piece of evidence. Spots of blood that were found on Karen's jeans and underwear at the time of her death had DNA profiles pulled from it, and that DNA did not belong to Karen or Philip. So that meant that the only other person that this blood could have belonged to was Karen's true killer, and that gave them enough reasonable doubt to acquit Philip. Philip Skipper would die in 2004 from stomach cancer, and at around about this time, Karen's now cold case was being looked into again. It had been around about 8 years since she was murdered. Investigators would look into that blood sample again to see if all of these years later they could put it into the national database and get a match. And miraculously, they did. The DNA belonged to 58-year-old John Randall Pope. John would be brought in for questioning, and as they always do, he completely denied any involvement in the murder. When asked if he wasn't the murderer, why was his blood found on Karen's clothing, he came up with the most batshit crazy story. He told the investigators that only weeks before Karen was murdered, he bumped into Karen on the street as she was walking her dogs. He leaned down to one of the dogs and the dogs bit him, causing him to bleed. Karen then pulled out a tissue from her jeans, wiped away the blood and put the the tissue back into her pocket. And that is how the blood must have gotten on her jeans and her underwear. Investigators didn't believe this for a second, and this was actually disproven by an expert. But they did have other evidence that backed up their belief that John Randall Pope was their man. This included many witnesses saying that on the night of Karen's murder, they remembered a man wearing a very distinct 3/4 length wax coat being around that area, and John had one that was identical that he wore all the time up until the murder was committed, and he never wore it again. He drastically changed his appearance, shaving his head, and he was almost identical to a composite sketch. That along with much more. In 2011, John Randall Pope would be convicted of the murder of Karen Skipper. It was determined that he had saw Karen out and about alone, walking her dogs, and decided to follow her, his motive being a sexual one. He caught up to Karen, partially stripped her, and then bound her with the dog leads. He then pushed her head under the water of the River Ely, as she is probably trying her best to wriggle away or fight for her life against him, but he coldly held her head under the water until she stopped fighting, until she was dead. He would be handed a sentence of life imprisonment with a minimum of 19 years to serve.
One woman and at least 5 men in a hotel room in London in Canada. In the early hours of the morning, a young woman known only publicly as EM experienced something that left her with trauma that she would likely have to deal with for the rest of her life. The case went to trial, and by the time that it ended in 2025, it had consumed Canadian hockey and left people asking the most uncomfortable question a country can ask about the sport that it loves the most, which is, what exactly are we protecting? It was June 2018 when members of Canada's 2018 World Junior Championship team, the young men who had won gold for Canada earlier that year, gathered in London for a Hockey Canada Foundation gala and golf tournament celebrating their victory. They were celebrated, honored, treated like heroes. Hockey is huge in Canada. It's a big deal, so bringing home a win naturally left people of the public putting these men up on a pedestal. The 5 men at the center of what followed were Michael McLeod, Carter Hart, Alex Formanton, Dylan Dube, and Cal Foot. Back in 2018, they were ranging from ages 19 to 20. By the time that this case actually goes to trial, they were 27, 28 years old. All were on their way to professional careers within the NHL. They win gold. Canada loves them. The entire team attends this gala, which is meant to be like an award ceremony of sorts, but essentially it was a huge party to celebrate their big win. Everyone is on cloud 9. It's mid-June. They go out. They're ready to have a fun night. While they're out, one of the team members, Michael McLeod, starts talking to a 20-year-old woman. They're hitting it off, so he says, "Hey, why don't we go back to my hotel room?" The girl, known as EM, agrees. CCTV footage captures them leaving. They go back to his hotel room. They do it because they're both into it and they want to, and then EM gets up to go to the bathroom. She is not wearing anything. When she comes out, there are now several hockey teammates walking in the room, which naturally catches EM off guard because why and how did their room now turn into the hangout room? Come to find out, Michael McLeod had texted his teammates basically offering up EM to them, saying, if you want to do anything to her or with her, come to my room. EM feels vulnerable because, again, wearing nothing, she's now in a room with 10 to 15 strangers who she does not know. Yeah, she agreed to go there with Michael McLeod in the first place, but she's now in a situation that she never expected to be in. When EM returns home later that night, her mom can tell that something isn't right. EM has been crying, and I assume that she looks very clearly upset, to the point that her mom asks her what happened, and all EM can say at that point is, "It's all my fault, it's all my fault." So her mom, in her gut, although EM has not told her the full story, makes the decision to call authorities to say, something's happened to my daughter. She was in this hotel room with all of these guys. She's not okay. Something happened, and we need to figure out what it was. It's hard for her to talk about, but eventually EM opens up and tells authorities what happened in that room. She says what I already told you about, voluntarily going there with Michael McLeod, engaging in intimate activities with him, but then she says that the rest of the team members unexpectedly showed up, and then the entire environment in that room changed. EM says that she was scared. She was also not in the right state of mind because she had previously been out that night with friends, but she says that the men then took control over the situation and forced her to do things, certain things to them and for them that she did not feel comfortable doing. But out of fear, EM felt like the only safe option was to do what they wanted. Prosecutors would later argue that the players did do what they wanted without taking the necessary steps to ensure that EM was voluntarily consenting to certain acts. Trigger warning, this is not easy to listen to. These acts included things such as spitting on her, her behind and essaying her in multiple ways, several of them taking turns and asking who wanted to do what next. EM also stated that the men were speaking amongst themselves, talking about golf clubs that they had in the room because they had that golf tournament the next morning, asking if they should insert them and wondering, quote, if she could take a hole one, end quote. She says that a lot of team members were in the room, but later specifically spoke about the 5 that I mentioned as the ones who actively participated in said acts and commanded her on what to do next. Also saying others were just on the bed on their phones eating food like nothing was happening. EM says that she felt scared, I feel like any person would be, and says that she's already not the kind of person that's good at standing up for herself, so when everything was happening, she was already having trouble registering what was actually happening to her. She couldn't really register, let alone say no, and then standing up and trying to leave the room. She disassociated, letting her mind go and, quote, just let my body do what it needed to do to keep me safe, end quote. She said when she did attempt to walk towards the door to leave, when she attempted to leave the room, she was, quote, directed, manipulated, and intimidated into remaining there. She also said that at times she heard the men say, quote, she's crying, don't let her leave, don't let her leave. When they were done, I guess, the men told her to leave the room because they had the golf tournament the next morning and they needed to wake up early for that. But not before she was allegedly forced into making a pair of videos, 2 videos, in which she stated that everything that happened was consensual. The videos are only seconds long, but in them you can hear a man's voice saying, everything that just happened was consensual, right? You wanted to do this, right? She says yes, and then the video cuts off. Absolutely terrifying and so disturbing, because if you are going to argue that what you did was consensual, which is what they would go on to argue, why did you take that video to begin with? That's weird behavior, because if you do something with a person that wants to do the same thing, you are not then going to pull out your phone, put their camera in front of their face and say, hey, you wanted to do this, right? Say that you wanted it, because why on earth would you need that? That in itself, in my opinion, says that you knew that what you were doing was wrong, because at the very least, you were not sure. If you felt the need to ask for confirmation, then you were not sure, and that in itself should have been your answer. And the fact that there were so many people inside of that room and not one person said, hey, this is messed up, let's stop. Not a single person. Insanity, but it gets worse. So, EM and her mom report this to authorities back in 2018, which prompts 2 investigations to be opened. A local police investigation into the group SA and one with Hockey Canada. EM's mom's boyfriend at the time had also called Hockey Canada's HR department himself to report the alleged SA that occurred. Former Hockey Canada CEO Tom Rennie, as well as the president Scott Smith, later said that they learned about what happened when they arrived back home from the gala. So, some teammates are interviewed. Alex Formanton, one who EM claimed that he took her to the bathroom specifically to do things just the 2 of them away from the group, says in his interview, just looking at his face makes me nauseous, to be honest with you. Not the point, because what he says is worse, right? So in short, he says, oh, EM was actually the one that was begging us to do things with her. We didn't want to, and she got really embarrassed and frustrated, and I think a little bit angry, because I don't know, I think that she thought that we thought that she wasn't hot enough because we didn't want to do anything with her in front of our teammates, because that's weird and that would have made us feel uncomfortable. But she was mad that we didn't think that she was hot enough. So yeah, I mean, like, we did stuff, but she was the one who kept asking for it. Michael McLeod, the guy who EM did agree to go back to the hotel room, says, yeah, this was all her idea. She was the one that told me to invite all of my teammates into the room. She said that it was a fantasy that she had or something. He also said that he texted his teammates to come to his room because he had food. That's all he says, that he texts them, hey, I ordered food. If you want to come eat, come to my room. Which is a straight up lie, because what he actually texts his roommates is, quote, who wants to be in a 3-way quick 209 Mikey. I'm not exaggerating, that's what they said. And then in early 2019, police closed the investigation, and in 2020, Hockey Canada closed their investigation. No charges, no arrest, no anything. Michael shows the videos that he had of EM saying that she did give consent, and authorities literally said, oh, so she did want this to happen. Case closed, nothing to see here. EM was devastated. She felt so defeated. I cannot imagine what she felt when the investigations were closed. This is a quote from later on, but quote, she's never really experienced not being believed like this before. She agreed to do everything asked of her by the criminal justice system. She spoke to the police whenever requested. She reviewed her evidence. She prepared her testimony. She answered every question. She spoke with intelligence and from the heart, yet it was still not enough. So then we get to 2022. EM files a statement of claim seeking $3.5 million in damages from Hockey Canada, the Canadian Hockey League, and 8 players, quote, including but not limited to members of the Canada's men's junior hockey team from the 2018 World Junior team, end quote. She files it, and then Hockey Canada quietly settles. They reach an out-of-court settlement with EM for an undisclosed amount. Mind you, this is not public knowledge yet. Everything that has happened without it being reported on in the news. The public has no knowledge of it yet. That same month, former CEO Tom Rennie hears that a Canadian news outlet would be breaking the story about the SA allegations and the quiet settlement. And that's what happens. A reporter with TCN breaks the news to the public for the first time, mentioning EM's SA allegations, the lawsuit that she filed, and the settlement. Canada's former Minister of Sport has said since then that that month was the first time that she heard about all of this, right? So she's like, well, how did Hockey Canada settle? Like, where did the money come from? So she orders an audit from Hockey Canada to find out where the funds came from, because if they used money from their general fund, part of that money could be like registration fees, which are paid by minor hockey families across the country, meaning that parents whose children played in these hockey leagues across Canada could have, without knowledge, helped pay to make an SA case against the national team go away, which is messed up. So she orders this audit to make sure that no public funds were used in the settlement, and from there she announces a freeze in Hockey Canada's federal funding until the investigation is completed. Turns out public funds were used in the settlement. According to Hockey Canada, they had a national equity fund that they kept in case they had to use those funds for, quote, a broad range of expenses related to safety, wellness, and equity initiatives, end quote. Hockey Canada quickly announces from there that the fund would no longer be used to settle SA claims moving forward. While all of that mess is going on, the London police then announced that they are going to be reopening their investigation to conduct an internal review of the investigation that took place back in 2018. Hockey Canada also says that they would reopen their investigation, and that in the meantime, all players from that 2018 team would have to cooperate, or else they could face getting banned from future Hockey Canada activities. On June 30th, Tom Rennie retires as a CEO, appoints a new CEO, but then that CEO is forced out, and its entire board of directors then resigns. In July of 2023, Catherine Henderson is announced as the new Hockey Canada president and CEO. In January of 2024, news reporters report that the 5 players, the 5 that we have been talking about, are asked to turn themselves in. They are all arrested and charged with SA, not because new evidence has emerged overnight, but because since the information had been made public, there was now a lot of pressure from the public for authorities to actually do something about this. At the time of their arrest, 4 out of the 5 were active NHL players. Michael McLeod and Cal Float were with the New Jersey Devils, Dylan Dube was with the Calgary Flames, Carter Hart was with the Philadelphia Flyers, and Alex Formanton had been playing in Switzerland. All 5 of them took leaves from their team. All 5 of them lawyer up, and then all of their lawyers come out and put out statements claiming their innocence. We are nearly 6 years since the night that everything took place, by the way. It happened in 2018, now it's 2024. It shouldn't have, but it took 5.5 years after the crime took place for arrests to be made. The first trial, the first, took place April 22nd of 2025. The trial opens with a jury seated and ready to go. The prosecution goes through with their opening statements, and then they break for lunch. They come back, and then one of the jurors tells the judge that a defense attorney spoke to them out in public. Alex Formanton's attorney specifically. Jurors are not allowed to interact with attorneys whatsoever. So the jury comes back, and the judge dismisses the jury. They are no longer going to be on this case, and the trial was over before it really started. A second jury was seated shortly thereafter. EM testifies for 2 days, then she gets cross-examined for 7 days. So she is telling her story, everything that has happened to her, all of the awful things that she has been through. And then 4 weeks into the trial, a juror tells the judge that they feel uncomfortable because Alex Formanton's attorneys again keep looking at them and laughing at them in the courtroom. So then the second trial falls apart. The jury is dismissed, and a new jury has to be found and selected. But then the defense attorney, so the attorneys defending the men, not the victims, say, hey, you know what? Let's not do this a third time. Let's not have a jury. Let's just have a trial, no jury, in which you, the judge, and the judge only decides the verdict. Their argument was that opening statements had already been heard, that the victim, EM, had already spoken, and that she shouldn't have to go through everything again. And the judge says, okay, sure, no jury. I will be the only one to decide the verdict. A lot of people have strong opinions about that because they think that the defense attorneys could have potentially allegedly wanted this the entire time, to have a trial with only the judge, no jury, allegedly. But then the third trial begins with no jury. This is now into May of 2025. The judge hears testimonies from multiple witnesses and examines surveillance footage, text messages, and competing accounts of the night of June 19th, 2018. Some of the text messages include messages from a group chat from back in 2018 with 11 teammates. This group chat was created about a week after the crime took place. A teammate by the name of Jake Bean says, quote, no boys, like we don't have to make anything up. No one did anything wrong. We just went to that room to eat. The girl came. Lie number 1, that's not true. She wanted to have with all of us. Lie number 2. No one did. Lie number 3. She gave a few guys and we got out of the room when things got too crazy. Dylan Dupe, who was the captain at the time, says that he doesn't think that they're going to get in trouble for anything that they did. Michael McLeod then says, quote, "We all need to say the same thing if we get interviewed. Can't have different stories or make anything up," end quote. The trial continues. Prosecutors obviously building up their case around EM's account of that night, from everything that she remembered and from everything that she had reported back in 2018. But the defense's tactic was to make her sound not credible, arguing that her recollection of events was inconsistent and unreliable. Mind you, this trial is taking place 7 years after that night, so yeah, it makes sense that no one's memories would be as fresh as it would have been should the trial have happened sooner. But the defense uses that to their advantage, breaking down anything that they could to say, look, EM said that this happened, when in reality this is what happened. And in the small details that they could prove to be inconsistent with either CCTV footage or text messages, it sucks and it's terrible, but it did make the judge question whether everything that EM was alleging was true or not. One of the most significant pieces of evidence was the surveillance camera footage showing Michael McLeod leaving that night with EM. Footage that established that yes, they left together, but footage which both sides interpreted differently. The prosecution saw a man targeting a woman. The defense saw two people leaving together willingly. Ultimately, on July 24th of 2025, 7 years and 5 weeks after that night in the hotel room, Maria Caroccia delivered her verdict. She read the verdict for 5 hours, and at the end of it, all 5 men were acquitted on all charges. The core of her reasoning was direct about EM's evidence. Caroccia said that she did not find the complainant's testimony credible or reliable. She highlighted what she described as EM's, quote, tendency to blame others for the inconsistencies in her account. And just like that, all 5 men free to walk. If you're from Canada, I need to hear your thoughts about this. Yeah, I have no words. That's it from me today. Please let me know if you have heard about this case. Also, please let me know if you've seen any documentaries on this. I obviously was reading through a lot of news articles and watching videos on it, but I didn't look up if there's a documentary. I feel like there should be. But yeah, thank you for spending time with me today and for listening to EM's story. I hope you guys are having the best day. If not, go do something to make it the best day. Make somebody happy, and I will see you in my next video. Massive kiss on the forehead to every single one of you.
This is the story of Dwight Bacon and Brandon Davis. Shreveport, Louisiana, 2005. 30-year-old Tasha Lampkin and her cousin, Tanya Douglas, live in Houston, but they will often go to Louisiana to visit family. On April 22nd, their other cousin rented them a car so they could make that trip. The two arrived at Shreveport late. They thought it was too late to go visit family, so they decided to check in at the David Motel. At around 3 a.m., Tasha started to get hungry, but Tanya was too sleepy to even think about food. But Tasha said, "I'm just going to go get some Waffle House." And Tanya said, "Well, at least let me call the order in so it can be ready when you get there." Tasha left to go get her food, and Tanya ended up falling asleep. She didn't wake up until 6:30 a.m. And when she woke up, Tasha was not there. But she initially was not too worried about it because Tasha did have a guy friend in the area that she would visit when they came to Louisiana. Around that same time, it was a call about a car fire in Caddo Parish, which was about 10 or 15 miles from Shreveport. The detectives could tell that this fire was no accident, but they didn't see anybody inside of the car, so they decided to open up the trunk. That's when they seen a badly burnt body, which they could not identify. They couldn't even tell the race of the body, but what they did find was the license plates, which was not far from the car, which was burnt, but it survived to where they could read the numbers on it. And they also found a gold tooth with a T engraved in it. When the police ran the place on the car, they seen that it was a rental from Houston. When they contacted the rental place, they seen that it was purchased by a lady who identified herself as Tasha and Tanya's cousin. She actually told the detectives that she had just talked to Tanya because she was looking for Tasha. She told the detectives the motel the women were staying at. And when they went to pay Tanya a visit, they asked her, "Can you tell me anything about your cousin?" And Tanya said that she has a gold tooth with a T engraved in it. That's when the police knew that that was Tasha Lampkin. When her autopsy report came back, it revealed that she died of asphyxiation, which means
She was alive when that car was set on fire. But what happened? The police started by going door to door at the motel, and one of the officers just happened to look up and see a camera and asked the manager, does the camera work? Because they were banking on it not to work, but it actually did. It was just a very kind of older camera, grainy look. Looking at the camera, you can kind of see a figure moving, and the police are thinking maybe this is her boyfriend or the guy she was seeing. So they decided to call him in for questioning. But when he came in for questioning, they asked him, you know, is this your girl? Are y'all together? And he said no. Then he provides them with an alibi the night she went missing, and his alibi was his girlfriend. He admitted to talking to Tasha that night, but he said they did not see each other because he was with his woman. And his alibi checked out. His girlfriend vouched for him. Now it's back trying to piece things together with the only evidence they have, the grainy surveillance camera from the motel. Now on the camera, you can see the Nissan Maximum leaving the hotel, but they just didn't know if Tasha made it to Waffle House. So they decided to pay the Waffle House in Bossier City a visit, but only one problem. They didn't have no cameras. Waffle House. Now y'all know y'all need cameras. But they did ended up having a receipt from Tasha from the night before. That let detectives know that she made it to get her food, but did she make it back? Yes, she did. On the camera, you can see the Nissan pulling back into the parking lot, and you can see this little red Toyota following close behind. Just a couple minutes later, the two cars leave again, but you can't see any interaction. The camera is only facing literally one angle. You can only see who's coming and going, and you can't see who's inside of these cars. So the police decided to put it on the news because you couldn't read the plates from that camera. As soon as they put this car on the news, the detectives got a call from a lady who said the car belongs to her daughter named Laquita. Now, when they went to go visit Laquita and asked her, what's her relation? Do she know Tasha Lampkins? And she said, that name doesn't ring a bell to me. They asked Laquita where she was that night. She said she was at her friend Granada's apartment. Now, Granada has a brother named Dwight Bacon, and he lives with his sister. And all that night, he was pestering Laquita to borrow her car, and she finally agreed. All she said was, fill up the tank and don't be gone long. But Dwight was gone until the early morning. He didn't get back to like 5 or 6 a.m. Even though they know Dwight was driving the red car that night, they still didn't have enough evidence that he had committed this crime. So they had to do a little more digging. Inside the little red Toyota was some contact lenses, and it read Rebecca on them. They decided to put that on the news as well, and quickly got a hit. Rebecca Speed contacted the station claiming the lens case. She said that on the morning of April 23rd at around 1 a.m., she had just got back to her apartment and getting out of her car when she heard somebody say, hey. When she turned around, it was a gun pointed at her hand. Rebecca took off running and screaming, and she was banging on her apartment door until the security came and saved her. The detectives are hoping that Rebecca can identify Dwight as one of the suspects, so they put that in their back pocket. The police got word that Dwight had pawned a 380 about a month prior, so they decided to go to the pawn shop just to see if the gun was still there. But guess what? This fool went to go get the gun back on April 22nd, the day of, at 8 a.m. He went as soon as they were open on camera. But what else did he buy? Ammunition, the brand American Eagle, the same brand that was on the 2 shells at the car fire. The car was shot twice in the gas area. I guess they were trying to ignite the car by shooting it, but left the 2 shells behind. That's when they decided to raid the apartment of Dwight's sister where he was staying at. And in Dwight's room, up in the closet, in a shoebox, what do they find? The 380 with the fresh new pack of bullets. Just stupid. Dwight was called in for questioning on April 27th, 4 days after the murder. He did admit to borrowing the car that night, but he said he was at the Regency on the other side of town until that evidence rolled out and his story changed. Dwight said, "I'll tell you what happened, but I wasn't by myself." That's when he named Brandon Davis, somebody he went to school with. These two are very young, I think like 20 or 21 years old, but Brandon Davis literally just got out of jail for robbery. Dwight told the detectives that they were sitting in Waffle House parking lot when they seen Tasha. They had just robbed Rebecca a couple hours prior. They followed Tasha back to the David Motel, and when she parked, they blocked her in and got out and held her at gunpoint, forcing her to drive and follow the red car. They then drove to Caddo Parish. That's where they sexually abused Tasha and robbed her, only getting away with $80. They then forced her in the trunk and shot the gas cap twice, trying to ignite the whole car, but they ended up just lighting it on fire. As they were walking away, Dwight told the detectives that Tasha was pleading for her life. She was saying that she had a son and just begging to live, and they still just left her there. Brandon Davis pled not guilty. He was charged with first-degree murder, kidnapping, and rape. And Rebecca Speed identified him as the one that held her at gunpoint. He was found guilty of first-degree murder. The state wanted the death penalty, but the jury was deadlocked, so he ended up getting life without the possibility of parole. Dwight Bacon pled guilty to avoid the death penalty. In June of 2009, his charges got reduced to second-degree murder, and he was still sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole. R.I.P. to Tasha, man. This was so senseless and stupid. $80. You did all this for $80. And I read that one of them was remorseful, like, "I apologize. We did all that for $80. It wasn't worth it for all." Now that you in there rotting, now you feel, boy, rot. From the inside out, rot.